All right, everybody, welcome back. And with me today, it's just a really, really special, amazing lady that's going to be with us today. Her name is Alfrea Riley Moore, and she has an online magazine that is just for homeschoolers, but I just found out it's getting ready to go to print, and it's going to be well, I'm going to let her tell you about it. But let me tell you a little bit about Alfrea first. So she's a homeschooling mom. She has two young people. She has two kids, and she calls them kiddos. I love that. So as a homeschool advocate, and really, so she's someone that really has gone out and gotten out in the community and talked more about why homeschooling makes such a difference. And so she believes that most people who really want to homeschool, that they can if they're willing, but they have to be willing to do something. And she found a couple of things to be able to find and use your own unique gifts, and then be able to access the right resources. So you're looking for what's important to you, but also then how do you find the resources that fit your own unique and personalized gifts that go back to your kids? So I love it. She's the founder and the publisher of and if I say this wrong, correct me, do you call it Melanated? How do you say the first name of that?
Melanated Gold.
Melanated, yeah, that's why I'm a math guy, not a reading guy, right? Melanated Gold Homeschool Magazine. And she's also the owner of the Melanated Gold Review Squad. And she's actually doing some reviews for some of our programs right now. So we're super excited Alfrea, to have you here today. And probably the best thing to do, we're going to talk a lot about the magazine today and about your review squad and how you guys do the things you do. But first, tell us a little bit about how did you discover and get into homeschooling?
All right. Thank you, Dennis, so much for having me. My family's journey into homeschool actually started a couple of years ago. We were a military family, so we moved around a lot. And finding a little bit of stability was a challenge for us. We've done public schools, we've done private schools, but my kids never had like the same set of friends twice because we would move so much. And when we finally got settled, I'm one of those people who I do a lot of research. So I read all the reviews for this particular school. I looked at test scores and I said, this school is going to be perfect for my kids. So I enrolled them, and within 6 months, they were crying just about every day. They like hated it. And I'm like, how could this be? Because everyone said the school was so great, but it just didn't work for my family, which is something that I'm learning in homeschool. You have to do what works for your family. And so my husband and I talked about it, and he says, well, you teach them at home anyway. Why don't you try homeschooling for a little bit and see how it goes? It stuck. And we've been homeschooling ever since.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's awesome. Hey, first of all, thank you for being a military family, because, the sacrifices that you make, and you kind of pointed to it already, like you're traveling and you're here and you're there and you're uprooting and you're moving from one place to the next. And then your husband's out and, he's part of the military, right? And so there's always risk involved that. So first, thank you for being a military family. And I know we'll have a lot of our students and population that work with us, but a lot of listeners are dealing with that as well. And they either know someone in the military or they're a military family themselves. So that's awesome. So, okay. So tell me so you've discovered homeschooling. So I'm going to take a guess. You probably weren't homeschooled yourself as a young person.
Right.
So,
no, I was not homeschooled. I was
tell me
not
about what's your background? How did you grow up in the education world for yourself?
So my mom believed in having the best education, whatever that might be. So I went to a magnet school throughout my tenure, 7th grade through 12th grade. And it was one of those schools that you had to do testing to get into, and everybody was competing to have these great academic averages. And it was really a great experience. So I will preface everything I say with, there is nothing wrong with attending any type of traditional school. You have to just do what works best for you. So I always thought homeschool kids were weird because I didn't know very many of them. So the ones
Right.
that I did know, I didn't think that they were quite normal. So I never thought that that would be my family's experience. And I wanted to
Wow.
be that mom that got in a carpool line and dropped my kids off and went about my day. I never thought that I would be a homeschool mom.
Wow. Okay. So now that you are, so it's interesting, right? Because one of the things that comes up often when I talk to, especially talking to homeschool moms who home all day and they're with their kids, is that one of the things that we've seen that people have talked about is that the daytime is probably one of the most important times of day for young people. It's like, it's that time of day when you really are discovering with them, and they're active and they're doing their thing. And, when people take kids to school, and I'm a former public school teacher, so I know, so I can relate to the world of being in the public school, and I love my experience there, but I really, really love my experience being in the homeschool market. But what's it like for you, instead of knowing that you were dropping kids off and then you wouldn't see them until later in the day? And so maybe some of the best hours of the day, and now you get to experience that with your kids. How's that been different for you? And did you notice something right away when the kids were home with you and you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was going to be this way?
I did, especially in the academic realm. I noticed things and gifts about my children that I didn't know that they had. So I would send my children to school and they would come home and they were making really good grades, but I didn't realize that my son was so gifted in music, or that my daughter was so gifted in like building things. Because at school, they're following the curriculum that they're given, but at home we have the freedom to explore. So homeschool has given us the opportunity to learn more about each other. They learn me as a mom, those things that kind of make me tick or make me excited. And I learn them as kiddos, what do they like? Because I think a lot of times as parents, we raise our children or we see our children and we want to make lives for them. But homeschooling has given me the chance to see what they want and what they want to be and what they like to do.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so how did that lead you to creating the magazine?
The
And tell us a little
magazine,
bit about it.
absolutely. So the magazine actually came out right around August when the pandemic started. And it was my way of bridging a gap. We have families who were homeschooling before the pandemic. And even though it was kind of like a smooth transition for a lot of us, there were still challenges. We lost that sense of connection because, believe it or not, homeschool kids actually have a really big social life. So they have co-ops and different activities that they're in. And when the pandemic came about, those things kind of stopped. So we were in uncharted territory there as homeschoolers. We were trying to figure out, okay, so what's going to happen next for us? And then you have a whole big population of people who now are either having to homeschool that never wanted to, never anticipated that that would be their life. And you have people that are schooling at home. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And the magazine came about to be like a platform to say, hey, we're here to help. How can we help you during this time? So we got together. It's a couple of homeschool moms, dads, and grandparents, and we write articles on, things that have worked for us. We encourage each other and say, hey, you can do this. And we also just build this community where everyone can share their experiences.
That's awesome. And I think so often too, sometimes homeschooling becomes something that we are led to, but not always led to because it's something that we were looking for. But once we find it and we've been led to it and we discover what it is, and just being able to see, like, discovering the own gifts of your own kids, it's just amazing, what doors get open. What did you discover about yourself as being able to be a homeschool mom slash teacher? What have you noticed about yourself as something that you're doing that maybe you never thought you were capable of doing or able to do before?
As a homeschool mom, I've learned I'm way more resourceful than I ever thought that I would be. When I started off as a homeschool mom, my first initial contact with homeschooling was I needed to buy these box curriculums and I needed to have everything planned out for me because I didn't feel confident that I can do it myself. So I spent a lot of money and a lot of time buying these things that laid everything out for me. But over time, as we've identified those gifts and our strengths and things that challenge us, I'm able to pull back those things and get more creative with how we learn. So instead of always just getting a whole box curriculum, we may take our learning into the community. So we do math in the grocery store, we do math in the bank, we write papers on things that really matter to us. We get out and we meet our political figures and we learn about government that way. So we've become a lot more creative than we ever anticipated we'd be.
Wow, that's awesome. Hey, I was going to ask you tips you have for homeschool moms, but you just gave us several of those, right? So, do you, when you look at that, do you have like some go-to tips for, especially for people, not necessarily when things are going well, But in those tough times, when times get tough, what do you do when, it's like, and oftentimes, sometimes kids get tired, right? And they're kind of like, oh, why am I doing this? Or I want to be playing music, and we've got a musician in the house, and they're like, okay, but we've got these other things, so when times get tough, or you just find, pandemics happen, right? And who knew that this is where we'd be a couple of years ago, that we'd be here today. What are your go-to tips for parents when times get tough?
Mhm. I have a couple of those. My first tip would always be to discover your why. And I have a post-it note that I put on my computer, and it tells me exactly why I started homeschooling. And my reason for homeschooling was that I wanted to give my children a life that I felt I could give them. And only with my love for them and the way that I feel passionate about teaching them, only I can give that to them. So when they're acting up or we're having a challenging day, I always remember that I'm giving them this amazing experience. So that would be my first tip. Remember
Mm,
your why. Second, know that your homeschool experience is not going to look like anybody else's. It may and sometimes have some similarity in the things that we see on social media. We aspire for some of those things, but your homeschool may not look like that. And that is perfectly okay. And then finally, my last tip I would give for anybody that homeschools, thinking about homeschool, considering homeschool, or on the fence is just being present and be in the moment, because the greatest learning experiences that you can have won't come from a textbook. It'll
mm.
come from those times that you're spending with your kids and getting to know them. And if they want to play some music, sometimes it's just important to just let them play and see where it goes. You can always come back to the structured learning if that's something you're into, but just allowing them that opportunity to show you who they are and grow into themselves is the most important thing you can ever give them.
Oh, that's so great. It's so great. And, and how thankful, I share this with people often. It's like, my son is 16,
Mhm.
and we started homeschooling when he was 9,
Oh, wow.
and we brought him home from school. And, there was so many things we discovered about him and things he discovered about himself. And
Right.
one of those was music. He's a musician as well. He's a dancer. But knowing that he had that inside of him, he didn't know he had it inside of him. We didn't know he had it inside of him. But
Right.
still to this day, he still says thank you. And he says,
Mhm.
thank you for bringing me home. Because, when we told him, we said, we're going to homeschool you, he cried.
Oh, I bet. I
It's like,
bet.
just the tears, the big tears down his face. And he's, no, no, my friends. And so we said, okay, well, let's just see how it goes. It was
Mhm.
probably the first month or so in, and he's like, oh, I really like, there's a 9-year-old, right? And now as a 16-year-old, he's like, oh no, I wouldn't have it any other way. And he's
Mhm.
doing just amazing things in his life. So it's good. So, all right. So I came from the traditional school world. I was a classroom teacher and had done so for many years. And now I'm in the homeschool world, right? So I've seen both worlds. So how does
Mhm.
it look to you? Does it look like, does homeschooling, does it have to look like a traditional school?
Homeschool shouldn't look like a traditional school.
That's
And
great.
I think, that's where we go wrong. And I did that in the beginning. That was my biggest homeschool mistake. So when I talk to parents who are thinking about homeschooling and they say, oh, yeah, I'm going to buy this desk and we're going to have this time. And I say, that's where you messed up, because I did that too. And I would wake my kids up at 7 o'clock in the morning because that's what I felt they had to do. And they were
Right.
miserable and cranky. And our events were it was horrible. And over the Christmas break, I said, you know what, Alfred, something has to give, because we're not going to continue with homeschooling the way that we are. So then I started letting them sleep in a little bit. And then I started to say, okay, well, we don't have to do math at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's one of those subjects that for them works better in the afternoon. So
Right.
we started making homeschool work for our family and our rhythm instead of trying to recreate school, because that's not what it's supposed to be.